Why do you think slavery is wrong now, and why was it okay back 2 centuries ago? Chris, can you give me the PowerPoint here?
All right, let's see it.
First of all, Old Testament slavery was not race-based forced servitude.
This is accurate because race as a question of skin color would not be invented until European Christians invented it around the Middle Ages in order to validate and facilitate and justify their imperialist agendas.
It was voluntary means of working off debt or keeping captives from mustering a rebellion.
So this is a half-truth that is working overtime to deceive. There are indeed two main types of slavery that are described throughout the Hebrew Bible, and one of them is debt servitude. And I suppose you could refer to it as voluntary to the degree one feels that one has options for getting out of debt or out of extreme poverty. But the other kind is not a means of preventing captives from mustering a rebellion. Every single time that concern arises in the Bible, the solution is always the same. They kill the captives. This is just an attempt to make the chattel slavery, which is the other type of slavery, sound reasonable, sound justified. Well, we got to have a way to prevent captives from mustering a rebellion. They did. They killed them. Chattel slavery is heartily endorsed in Leviticus 25, verses 44 through 46. You can buy, sell, inherit, pass on slaves as property. It explicitly describes them as property as long as they're not native Israelites. They have to be bought from the nations around Israel, not from Israel itself. The only slavery into which one could put a native Israelite was debt servitude, and Leviticus 25 also tells you not to treat debt servants who are Israelites like slaves, but to treat them better than the slaves you are buying from the nations around Israel.
Secondly, slave trading is condemned in the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testaments.
This is also false. The Exodus passage condemns kidnapping freeborn Israelites, and the 1 Timothy passage condemns kidnapping freeborn persons for the slave trade. And this fits with the legislation in the nations that surrounded ancient Israel and early Christianity, which also divided legitimate from illegitimate means of acquiring slaves. So there was legitimate slave trading and there was illegitimate. And as with the nations around Israel and early Christianity, they condemned certain types of kidnapping and also had a very active slave trade. And early Christians bought and sold slaves as well. There's not a single syllable of the Bible that condemns slavery in general or the slave trade in general.
Thirdly, the Bible teaches that all men are made in the image of God. Slave and master are equally human, protected, and one in Christ. That's throughout both Old and New Testaments.
So none of these passages on their own or collectively actually communicates what Turek is claiming here. The first three from the Hebrew Bible don't in any way, shape, or form indicate that enslaved peoples are equally human, protected, or one in Christ. For instance, Exodus 21:20 just says that if a master beats their slave to death, they will be punished. But it doesn't explain how they will be punished. The next verse, however, suggests that punishment would just be a fine. Because the next verse says, if they survive a couple of days and then die, there's no punishment at all, which is absolutely not true of freeborn persons. So the protection is not the same. And why is there no punishment at all? The text says, because he is his silver, his money, his revenue. In other words, he's lost that revenue. He's already been fined. And obviously the beating was not intended to kill them, it was just intended to discipline them, and so the death is considered accidental, and because they've already lost that revenue, there's no fine. Elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, the accidental killing of a freeborn Israelite still results in the death penalty. So they are not equally protected. The closest we come to Turek's claim is Galatians 3:28. Which says there is neither male nor female, nor slave nor free in Christ, but all are one. And that's a great aspirational passage. However, does that mean that people are equally protected and have equal rights? Well, Turek believes in male headship, believes that men have authority over women in the church, which means that although God says, oh, I can't tell a difference, there is neither male nor female, Turek certainly can, and Turek sees one as having more privileges, more rights, more authority than the other. So, yeah, this is complete and utter nonsense.
Fourthly, Jesus came to set the captives free.
This is Jesus' quotation of Isaiah 61 in Luke 4, and the statement is not that enslaved peoples will be set free. It's that prisoners, captives, will be set free. This has absolutely nothing to do with slavery.
And fifth, the Bible's main goal is spiritual redemption, not social reform.
So this is simply false. The passages that promote social reform as a path to spiritual redemption far outnumber those that promote social reform as the fruits of spiritual redemption. However, Turek and other Protestants are going to presuppose univocality, the notion that the Bible speaks with one single unified and solitary voice or perspective. And that ideology is not supported by any data. But when one imposes it on the Bible, it requires picking and choosing which texts are going to be prioritized and centered and which are going to be marginalized, reinterpreted, or ignored. And here, the spiritual redemption is being prioritized and the social reform is being reinterpreted. And a good microcosm of that large-scale effort is Paul and James's disagreement. Paul says Abraham was justified by faith, not by works. James directly disagrees with Paul and says, you see that Abraham was justified by works and not by faith alone. But because of univocality, these two need to be made to agree. And Protestants are very obviously going to prioritize and center Paul's perspective, which means James has to either be ignored or taken out, as Martin Luther wanted to do, or it has to be reinterpreted to agree with Paul. And that final approach is what most Protestants do today. And they insist that, oh, James is talking about the fruits of faith. James is not saying you have to do the works to arrive at the faith. James is saying once you have the faith, then the fruits will follow after. They're putting the cart firmly before the horse because it's more important that James be made to agree with Paul than it is we understand what James is actually saying. They're telling the Bible what it is and is not allowed to say. And Turek is just doing that on a grander scale in an effort to make it sound like the Bible doesn't appreciate slavery, and it absolutely does.